I want you to know this is nothing personal. It's purely business.
Killing me won't stop anything, Sanchez! See you in hell!
Welcome to Movie Matters. I'm Kevin.
I'm Jake.
And today we're talking about License to Kill from 1989. Timothy Dalton, James Bond movie, our first of the podcast. There are a few in the 80s, and this one is one of my favorites. I've seen it a handful of times. I'm a big Bond fan. I grew up watching all his movies, or all the Bond movies, and I love this movie because it's very 80s. Very, very 80s.
Yeah. There's quite a bit about it. We'll get into it, but it's like it's interesting how it definitely looks and feels very 80s, from like set design and like what people are wearing and everything, but it's filmed very much like the 60s and 70s Bond movies, which is interesting, especially in 1989. Like camera work and stuff had really started making like very big strides and like how, things were filmed. So we'll talk about that a little bit, I'm sure.
Yeah. And this is the first time you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I liked it a lot. I had always heard that Dalton was like the worst Bond. So I tried to like keep that out of my head. But I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised. I did like him quite a bit in this. My only like criticism has nothing to do with like the acting or anything. It's just that he looks kind of shaggy, and that's not what, like, in my mind, James Bond's supposed to be very like clean cut, like proper, like British guy, and he's just like a little too shaggy. But that's the only thing that like bothered me a little bit, and like, but not enough to make me dislike anything else about the movie, So
Yeah. He looks like a schlub. I don't want to watch the movie.
yeah, no, nothing like that.
I feel like his haircut is very 80s.
Yeah.
It's kind of slick back, poofy hair. It's pretty 80s.
Very long hair.
Yeah.
But like it's like all pressed like against his head.
Yeah. I've always liked Timothy Dalton. I'm not Living Daylights was his first one. It was okay. I mean, that's where they had the V8 Vantage Aston Martin in it, which was super cool. And there's no real Bond car in this movie.
No, all the cars in this movie suck. Like, I don't know if it's because it's 1989 and the cars in general just kind of sucked, but yeah, there's not like any cool cars in this movie.
Yeah, and that's kind of a staple of the Bond movies is, obviously the DB4 and other cool cars. I mean, the only cool car in this movie, in my opinion, is the Maserati. I think it's a Quattroporte at the end that the bad guy, Sanchez, Robert Davi, is driving in.
But it's a shitty 80s car. Like,
I don't know. I think it's cool, but it's probably a piece of shit.
Yeah, I mean, like,
it's a Maserati.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure, like, at the time it was probably cool, but, like, to me, there's, like, probably not much difference between that and a Ford Taurus design-wise, like, at that time, so...
Probably a fair point.
What you'd expect from, a Bond movie as far as, like, a cool, slick car, like, that doesn't fit the bill, so...
Yeah. Yeah, this Bond movie's a lot different than the other ones, and that's why I really like it. Especially because it's from the late 80s, and it's kind of a product of its environment of all the movies prior to it. And, it wanted to be a hardcore action flick, and the movie is violent. It's like the most violent Bond movie ever made. It's bloody. It's the action, and it's awesome. It's literally the whole plot is cool because it's completely different than all the other Bond movies too. It's a revenge flick. It's literally him going rogue and going after a Cuban drug lord and trying to take him down, which is so cool and so 80s. It's such an 80s plot.
Yeah, and it's like it's very like you said, it's drug centric, which is also a big like 80s, plot element is like narcotics trade. So that definitely adds to the level of 80s, in the movie. But yeah, I mean, like it was that's same for me on like every point you just made. I love that it's a revenge movie. Like there isn't even a mission given out by M at all in the movie, which is really neat. We do get Q later on in the movie, which is pretty cool, because he kind of goes rogue too, which is pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, it's like straight up just Bond trying to kill this guy because he almost killed his best friend and did kill his best friend's brand new wife. So it's like, up to this point, I don't think there's any like explicit revenge kind of storylines in any of the movies up till this point.
No.
Most of them, usually by the end of the movie, Bond has like a grudge with the bad guy. Yeah. But it's not like this, where like right out of the gate, it's just pure revenge. I mean, like the one that I would compare this to is GoldenEye, kind of in a way. Although it's not quite the same. Yeah,
I would almost even compare it to like Quantum of Solace.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like a revenge flick, but like, in that movie, there's a lot of production issues with that movie. But this movie was deemed like a financial disappointment, which is crazy because it made a lot of money, but not as much as the other Bond movies. It was the last Bond film for 6 years. Like there was a 6-year hiatus until GoldenEye came out, which is crazy. And they did that because of the box office failure of this film. And John Glenn, the director of the film, left Eon Productions, the production company behind Bond at the time. And John Glenn had directed a bunch of Bond movies before, and he considers this one to be his personal best, which I think is really cool, because he's made some good ones in my opinion. But like this movie, it's kind of a cult classic, which is ironic in the James Bond franchise.
Yeah.
Because it, like, critics and like audience people and like, us, like we deem it a classic, and like everybody loves this movie, but it's kind of a hidden gem in the whole Bond, like, discography or filmography.
Absolutely. Like, like we said, I had never seen this before. Like growing up, I had always seen the Sean Connery and Roger Moore movies. And those are kind of the ones that everybody thinks of in like the classic, era of Bond. So I think most of the films made in the 80s, I think, fly under the radar. Cause they're like, it's not Sean Connery, for one, and it's kind of the end of Roger Moore's tenure. Then it switches over to Dalton. Like I said, I think there's some stigma around Dalton, just floating around in general. I don't know if maybe it's because he's just not as iconic and doesn't have as many films under his belt as the other actors do.
Yeah, I think because like, Sean Connery's obviously like the most prolific James Bond, and I think it's followed by Daniel Craig, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But like, for example, George Lazenby, who only did the one On Her Majesty's Secret Service, like I never liked that movie, but I watched it as a kid, and I need to rewatch it. I've only seen it once. I just thought it was super boring. And then like obviously you've got, and like, so that's why I didn't, it's only one Bond movie, so I was like, all right, like this guy sucks, And then
Yeah.
you've got Dalton, who's only in 2 of them. And again, I liked him, but it's kind of lame that his Bond tenure got cut short.
Yeah, and like it's interesting. I don't know how old Dalton was in this, but he looks like he was a bit older than when the other actors first started in the role too, which may have been a factor in why he didn't maybe continue. I mean, also probably with the quote unquote disappointing box office return on License to Kill. You know how the studios can be cutthroat sometimes when they don't get exactly what they're thinking they're going to get out of box office returns. So I mean, it's it's interesting. I mean, and like also I think going into the 90s was a very different like cultural period too. It probably made sense to just shift the direction of the movies and take it into that more like contemporary kind of style of the Pierce Brosnan movies and
post Cold War.
right. And really push the because like the Brosnan ones I feel like are very action packed as well, and much more like grand in scale. Because a lot of the just the advancements in like technology and access to like big productions and stuff,
Yeah, you get a lot more CGI laden films versus more practical effects in the older ones. With for Pierce Brosnan movies, and that like you get into the 2000s with his, and they get kind of campy and like trying a little too hard because it's like, oh, we got CGI, let's just do this and big budget and explosions. And again, that's kind of why I like this film, is because it's like the action in it is awesome. I mean, the opening set piece with them, them going after Sanchez in the plane and them like skydiving out of the Coast Guard helicopter and hooking the plane up is very like Dark Knight Rises, esque. I mean, obviously this movie came out way before that, but it's like, it's pretty cool because Nolan said that, Christopher Nolan of The Dark Knight and Oppenheimer's success, he said that he's a huge Bond fan, and I feel like watching this scene in License to Kill, I was like, oh, this is probably where he's like, I want to have a cool airplane sequence, because this, like, I thought it was awesome in this movie, in License to Kill.
Yeah, I mean, the opening of this movie is absolutely wild, in like the best way. Is like you said, like they stop this drug dealer and like in the crazy way, and then Bond and Felix skydive to Felix's wedding, which is like crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of
like,
goofy.
So it's kind of goofy, but it's like super badass and like really sets the tone like for the movie. And like I do feel like that, because like the tone of the movie really starts to shift after the wedding scenes. And it starts to become darker and like more serious and more violent, and like it really fits with like the revenge plot. I feel like that opening scene with like the skydiving and stuff, and like little like there's like a couple like little like goofy things that like happen, but I think that's almost like the farewell to the like old kind of stylistic way that like the Bond movies used to kind of handle action in these like like kind of like big and cool like action set pieces, but like in a very like campy kind of way. Where like the movie definitely shifts that towards more like, I don't want to say like realistic action, but it's much more.
No, I agree.
Like,
it is.
Yeah, it's more like grounded action in like the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it feels more realistic, especially compared to the, Roger Moore era, where he's, smiling while he's beating someone up, and like, it's just like, it's kind of goofy, but that's why I love the Roger Moore
Like
movies, because they're just
judo
so funny.
chopping people on the neck and they like explode or something,
Yeah, exactly.
Like-
Yeah, goofy stuff like that. I mean, the movie has cheesy dialogue, of course. Any Bond movie does for the most part. But then, like, you get right into it, and the main bad guy, Robert Davi, who's Sanchez, he is whipping this girl, and they have him cut the heart out of this, like, the girl's boyfriend, and you hear him scream outside, and it's like, holy shit, like, this movie's violent.
Yeah.
And, like, yeah, it doesn't hold anything back. And I was like, I forgot about that, because I haven't seen this movie. Well, I haven't seen this movie in a few years. I watched it recently because they usually release them on like Amazon and in 4K all the time, and I think they're on HBO right now in 4K. So that's where I watched it, and it looked good.
Yeah, it's the way the movie escalates is really interesting. Like we just kind of talked about. But I do think it's very interesting to me how the movie starts with the capture of the main villain, and like that threw me for a bit of a loop, because Robert Davi, what I know him from is Die Hard as Agent Johnson.
Yeah.
Of the two Agent Johnsons.
Yeah.
And I, for whatever reason, was like not expecting him. Like, I thought like this was it, like, and he was gonna go away. But then when he like breaks out, I was like, oh, he's like the main bad guy. Like, I thought that was kind of interesting. Is like in most Bond movies, Bond never even confronts the bad guy until like the very end or near the end, which is, so I mean, this movie does a lot to, I think, subvert a lot of the normal Bond tropes, which is pretty cool. And like we said, it's there's no mission or anything, so like it's a cool and refreshing take, within the franchise, I think. And definitely just makes it stand out, I think. And maybe that's why people don't think of it as much, is because it's very different from all the other ones.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, Robert Davi is awesome in this movie. He's such a good villain, and I've always liked his acting in other movies. Like you said, Die Hard. He was in this movie Cops and Robertsons with Chevy Chase, and Jack Palance's the bad guy in that, which is kind of a goofy 90s movie. But I read that he tried to play Sanchez like James Bond. He wanted to be James Bond. He auditioned for Bond, and he read Bond's lines, and they're like, oh shit, like he's good, like he'd be a good Bond. But obviously he's not British. So that's kind of like how he played the characters. Like, I want to be like super suave and charismatic, but like be like Bond but bad, which is cool, and like it shows in this movie because
he's like really slick but really scummy. So like he's like very very like diametrically opposed to Dalton's Bond, which is pretty cool.
What do you think? What do you think about the Bond like opening credits and the song in this one compared to like the other ones?
So I think the song is fine. The opening credits were cool. I still think my favorite of all time is Casino Royale. The like animated like sequence in Casino Royale is so cool, and the song is awesome. But I know you like Skyfall a lot, so
I do like Skyfall.
Honestly, probably my number 2. But
I still think, I mean, we talked about it kind of in the last episode, like Duran Duran, like the View to a Kill.
That's a good one too.
Yeah, it's probably one of my favorites. But Gladys Knight did this License to Kill, which is super cool. The opening credits are pretty wild. There's like naked women in it, which is kind of like the theme of Bond, obviously. But like you can like see everything, especially in 4K. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I don't think they were ever expecting you to be able to see as much as they were actually filming at the time.
I was like, whoa, okay, this movie's PG-13.
It's like one of the funny things about like a lot of the movies that we've watched so far are like where you can tell where they kind of like skimped a little bit on things. Because like they were probably like, no one's ever going to be able to see this that well. So,
this movie won't get remastered in 4K in 30 years.
I was watching the title sequence. I was like, this is pretty
explicit.
Explicit. Yeah.
I was surprised too. I was like, oh. But that's kind of the theme of just like silhouettes of naked women dancing.
Yeah,
which is
I mean that's
kind of goofy.
Like
but
every single one of them has that basically. So
yeah, and I read that there's not as much sex in this movie because obviously Bond is known for just like kind of just having sex with all these women. But they kind of toned it down in this because of the AIDS epidemic at the time, especially in the 80s. And at first, people in interviews were asking Timothy Dalton if that was the case. They're like, oh, like, is it because of AIDS that there's like not a ton of sex in this movie? And he's like, no. And then in interviews later in his life, he's like, yeah, it was because of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I would have, like, it didn't faze me at all because like he's kind of driven by revenge and revenge only in this movie. So like he doesn't really spend time doing a lot of the other things that Bond usually does, like and he gambles a little bit, but like not as he doesn't like usually like if there's a casino involved in a Bond movie, he's like goes and does it like for pleasure, or like this he does it to like grab attention of the villain and stuff. So it's much more like utilitarian. He doesn't even get to drink his martini.
I know.
So, like there's a lot of things that like normally are like his staple kind of actions that he completely like pushes aside because he's so focused on killing this guy. Which again, I think is what makes this movie so cool.
Agreed. I mean, the whole, like, why he has to get revenge, I want to talk about that. Like, the bad guys feeding Felix to a great white shark is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, through that entire scene, I was, like, waiting for, somebody to come in and save him, and, like, when like the water starts turning red, I was like, "Oh shit, they're gonna like kill him."
Yeah, like, you see his leg. Yeah, it's like brutally violent. I was like, "Holy shit!" Like, this is the first PG-13 Bond movie, and it, obviously PG-13 didn't really exist until the mid '80s, and this movie is definitely deserved of that rating. Could almost be an R-rated movie too. Like, it's super bloody.
Yeah. For like, and like not in, and because like there's a few moments like we talked about. We didn't actually talk about this. We talked about it after the episode last week. About oh god, the one where the guy inflates and explodes. Live and Let Die.
Yeah,
like there's like moments like that are like implied gore, where like there's just like pieces of like fabric that kind of like fly over all over the place, or like whatever. But like this movie, it's like explicit and like paired with actual violence. So it's like it's very like jarring for this period of the Bond franchise. Yeah.
And I think the one scene that really highlights that is when Robert Davi Sanchez kills Crest in that pressure chamber.
Yeah.
And explodes his head.
Yeah.
His head just like blows up like a balloon, and then just pops, and blood just splatters over that little circular window. I was like, that scene always was like, holy shit! Like you feel bad for the dude too.
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
even
because
though-
that's that whole the whole lead up to that too is super interesting. Because Bond is playing this like double agent kind of game with Sanchez through most of the movie as he like interacts with him, and like pretty like beautifully sets up Crest to take the fall for like all the stuff that Bond has like interfered with like up until that point in the movie.
Yeah.
So like that was like really cool and like really great payoff. Though I was a little disappointed in the very end when Bond gets exposed. I did like that Benicio del Toro, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, but
Yeah.
I did like how he recognizes Bond in the factory and like kind of like, puts the gun to his back and he's like, don't say anything, like I was a little upset that was the moment that he chose to just blow his cover and like,
oh really?
start a fire. Yeah. Like just like he made it that far, and I feel like he could have talked his way out of that one too, potentially. But I don't know. I mean, you're setting up the end game there anyway, so like it was fine. But like I feel like the big payoff of him like infiltrating the organization wasn't as impactful. I feel like it could have been a little bit. I don't know, a little bit.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it could have gone in a different direction, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like while I think the way he kills Sanchez in the end, I think is fairly satisfying.
Very satisfying, in my opinion.
I feel like it's just a little impersonal. Like I feel like they could have made it a little bit more. Like I don't know.
It's brutal. He sets him on fire.
I know, but like I was expecting like a fist fight and like some of the other movies
True.
we've watched with like Commando and like stuff where like there wasn't
Yeah.
like a big epic like showdown. It was just
Fight
kind of
scene,
like
yeah.
they like he's just like pulls out the lighter that I mean Felix. I like the lighter aspect, but like
Yeah.
yeah, I mean. Don't get me wrong. It's a good ending and it's a good way to kill a bad guy, but it was just a little. It wasn't quite as personal as I thought it was going to be.
Personal in terms of like a fist fight, like let's get like very physical. Because I mean, I'd say it's pretty personal because he uses the lighter that Felix and Della gave him.
Yeah,
and
I
lights
guess
him
not
on fire,
as-
and that reveals the whole like this is why I'm fucking doing it and fuck you.
Right,
which is
not,
cool.
Not as physical, I guess,
Yes.
is a better way for me to phrase that.
And I think you think that because Daniel Craig, his Bond, and his Bond is so physically imposing and such a jacked, huge macho dude that he fights his way out of everything versus the other Bond movies are just like, I'm going to shoot. Like, I'm going to shoot you and that's about it. There's, there are fights and stuff, but usually there's not huge climactic fights in all these Bond movies, but in the newer ones there are.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, like there's, I think him getting set on fire, the bad guy, is super brutal. I think when like Bond's infiltrating the boat, the Crest boat, and the like bad guys pull up in their fishing boat with Sharky, his other friend, like hung up and dead, and then like Bond's like pissed and shoots the dude that kills him with a harpoon gun, which I love. Like that's super cool.
That was pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like he's water skiing from the plane because he like harpooned onto it, which I love. I think that part's super cool.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of cool little action sequences in this movie, like the whole bar scene where him and the Bond girl Pam are at, and it's very Roadhouse reminiscent of everyone fighting in the bar. I thought that was cool.
And the dancer doesn't stop.
Yeah, of course. Cool little tie between all these 80s movies is the composer of the movie is Michael Kamen, who did Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, Roadhouse. He did all those, and he did the score for this. And you can hear little themes like in it that sound very 80s and of the time period with all those action movies.
Yeah,
Because that's a huge change because it was a different composer this time around, and again, it just lends to the 80s vibe of it.
Yeah, he does fit the Bond, the classic Bond kind of elements in there really well too. So that's always nice. Like when you get those little like musical payoffs too.
Yeah,
is like sometimes like I hate when you don't get those in such a classic franchise. You know, it's just like, why are you depriving everybody of what they want to hear? You know?
Yeah, music plays a huge part in evoking emotions for sure, especially in movies.
Yeah. That reminds me of what I kind of want to talk about the production and like the way like the cinematography and kind of like the just in general the way the movie feels. Because as I was watching the movie, like this feels very much like a Bond movie before like GoldenEye, basically, like all the classics. It's filmed very similarly. Everything is kind of shot in that same sort of vein, where like it's lots of static camera shots of action. There's very little camera movement ever. Even like the big action sequences, there's no music. Everything is just happening. And like it kind of threw me for a loop because I was like, this is like, I wasn't expecting that. So for some reason, I thought that this was like from 83 or something. And when I saw it was 89, I was like, holy shit. Like, that's pretty far into the 80s to still be using techniques that were from like the 60s. So that was interesting to me. Like I said, I feel like this movie is in a lot of ways like a send-off to like the classic like Bond style. Before we move into the Pierce Brosnan era in the 90s. And like, I don't know. I want to kind of hear your thoughts on that. Like, cause it's, it didn't like take anything away from the movie for me. I just thought it was interesting that they filmed it like that, especially when contemporary, like this was a contemporary with Die Hard. And like if you put those two side by side, like the cinematography in Die Hard is like way like ahead of this, you know, in terms of style.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's way ahead in terms of style, Die Hard, comparatively. This movie, I think, and I mean, obviously I don't know the director, but I think the goal was to, you know, it's such a deviation from the other Bond movies, but let's still make it have that similar feel and vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why they kind of shoot it like that, which, I mean, I love this movie so much. I think it's awesome. I think the action is awesome. I love the deviation from the other Bond movies. But yeah, I mean, it definitely, I don't know, it feels like a Bond movie, but at the same time it doesn't. If you take Bond out of the his name out of the equation, I mean, I guess you could say that with most of the movies, kind of, but you take his name out of the equation, this could just be like literally a revenge flick of, I'm going to kill this drug dealer, you know? But, it's just, this one's also the most Americanized Bond movies, especially because it takes place pretty much, I mean, all in America and then Cuba, but
Yeah.
that's like a very also rare case in the
Right.
Bond movies. Like they never really take place in America, and like to have it in the Keys of Florida, and like that's super cool. I love that because the Florida Keys are cool, and then just to have it as a the drug dealer aspect of it, that's also cool. And again, like the whole Cuban thing, which post Cuban Missile Crisis and communism and all that, like it's a very interesting topic to have for Bond, and it's just I don't know, it's really good.
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, yeah, because the only other one that I can think of that takes place at least partially in the States is Live and Let Die. They spend a lot of time in Harlem.
Oh yeah.
And then like the Bahamas or something, I think is where
thought it was like
takes
Louisiana.
place, well, yeah, Louisiana also. But that movie is about drug trade as well.
Yeah.
And eventually they
I haven't
get
seen
to
that movie in a
some
while.
Caribbean island where they're actually like growing the whatever it is, the heroin or the cocaine or whatever. But yeah, I mean, like I think it is very cool that this all takes place basically in Florida, almost exclusively, until the end. And like, yeah, one of the, basically everyone, well, not everyone is an American in the movie, but almost everybody is, or they're, South American.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely fitting of that era. Like they even throw in that Benicio del Toro's character used to be a Contra, which is like a cool like throw to like 80s, geopolitics or whatever, which is kind of neat. 'Cause I feel like sometimes the Bond movies, I think, steer clear of current events because they tried to keep it very like timeless in a lot of ways. Where like this movie did kind of rope in some like current event type things, which I think is pretty cool. And the Daniel Craig movies, I think, did that as well, like incredibly successfully, especially in Casino Royale, where like Le Chiffre is like a terrorist, financier, or whatever. And M's great line where she says, "I miss the Cold War." But yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of praises to sing about this movie. So
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. I mean, again, think about how it's very an Americanized Bond movie. Think about the '80s and all the movies we've talked about, especially doing Macho Month with Arnold and Stallone. This movie's a very product of the times, and it's a very Americanized Bond movie, which is completely different from the other ones. But it's because it's '80s and it's so action oriented. But it's crazy because it's right at the end of the '80s where that's starting to die down, and we talked about that in Die Hard and in Batman, and I think that's kind of why the box office wasn't as grand as they thought it would be. So, yeah, I mean, I still have a decent amount of trivia to talk about on the movie. Let's see.
So do you have anything about the meditation temple? Because like that place is nuts. Like
that set design was sick.
Yeah,
like
it's
that,
so cool.
Yeah. And the Wayne Newton cameo, is hilarious. I love that, and he's kind of weird in it with his mustache and kind of creepy. And like the whole like how he's like bless your heart. I thought that was funny, but like that and I that whole like temple is like a front, literally just so they make they can just hide the drugs and stuff, which is super funny and cool. And the whole like telethon of them trying to raise money, and that's like literally the front of them selling the drugs, which is cool.
That's like I thought it was really cool that that's their like auction basically for like the
Yeah.
drugs is like through this like telethon. Like that was really cool. Like the way they built the whole operation for this like crime syndicate basically is just like super cool and like very like highbrow, especially like for like a Bond movie. I feel like a lot of times it's very like lowbrow, like the villains like plans are very like lowbrow. It's like, I'm gonna take over the world. It's like, yeah, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Like, or like, I'm gonna, you know, what, like, what's the plot of Goldfinger? He's gonna like melt like everyone into gold or something. Like, you know, it's just like really like dumb kind of like, I mean, like, not that the movies are bad, but like the villains like plots are very like
Simple,
singular
but like,
and simple and like, yeah, we're like, this is like, there's like a very complex machine that's running in the background to this movie that like adds a lot of like world building almost. Like it's cool. It adds a lot of complexity to the movie that like I think grounds it really well, like we've been talking about. It makes it more realistic.
100%. And think about how, like, I mean, you kind of even said it with the whole, like, I'm going to take over the world kind of stupid plot. And, like, Austin Powers makes fun of that. And, you know, like, $1 million, that stuff. And, like, let me capture this guy, my arch nemesis, and then just hold him with one guard. And then, like, that doesn't happen in this movie. There's no, like, I'm going to like, we capture Bond, we hold him in a room, he escapes, and then saves the day. That doesn't happen at all, which is cool and against type. And
well, he does get captured, but he gets captured by other intelligence agencies, which is which I thought was
that's
an
a cool
awesome like sequence, and even helps him sell that he's like on Sanchez's side, which was like very, very cool. Just like, like the writing in this from the plot standpoint is just very well done. Like we said, the dialogue is Bond cheesy, but like it's acceptable, you know, like, but the plot elements in this movie are great.
Yeah. Agreed. And then like there's like a ton of different organizations going after Sanchez, which is cool. Like Heller takes a deal with like the CIA. He's trying to get the Stinger missiles, which is kind of like that's kind of a little throwaway in the movie. It's like, what, Stinger missiles, like, who gives a shit, kind of. It's like, that was very kind of a subplot that was kind of pointless. But I like how Heller dies, and like he gets impaled with a forklift and gets driven through the wall.
Yeah.
I love that.
I think the main reason for the Stinger missiles and like that subplot, I think, is one to make Bond question Kennedy,
Pam,
and her loyalty to him, which like loyalty is a huge like thread in this movie, and it's used very well. So that, I think, and then to give Sanchez the missiles at the end as like a formidable thing that Bond needs to overcome in like the final chase. So I think like, and they do, because like I feel like in past Bond movies they would have just whipped out a Stinger missile like out of nowhere, and it's like, why does this guy have a rocket launcher, you know?
Yeah.
But like they actually set it up in this movie, which I appreciate. Like they do the same thing, I think, excellently with Q in this movie, where like Q shows him like 6 different tools, you know, but he only uses like 2 of them. Yeah. Which is not typical in a Bond movie as well. Like usually everything that Q gives Bond, he finds some like perfect use for it in the movie, you know? Like I mean, like he uses the camera obviously in this movie. which is
becomes a
as like a
sniper rifle.
sniper rifle.
Yeah.
But like he doesn't use the like X-ray Polaroid, and he doesn't use the like death laser function, on the camera,
Yeah.
and like he doesn't use the exploding alarm clock. He uses the C4 toothpaste in an awesome way,
Yes.
which was sick. Like that whole thing I think was awesome. The bulletproof glass that he has to overcome, I think that's a cool like plot element, and also something that I feel like isn't common in most Bond movies. Like usually it's like really easy for Bond to get at the villain like when it's time, and like this movie actually created like a challenge that I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, especially that he has to kind of hide his identity in a sense too.
Yeah, and it's like a multi-step plan that he had to execute in order to try and take the shot at Sanchez, which is cool. And like I just appreciate that they didn't do all of the usual like that, and like I'm being a little overcritical when I say this, but like the bullshit kind of like gimmicky moments where like he'd have to like use an alarm clock to like assassinate someone, or like whatever, like there's a lot of that in the older Bond movies, and like I think it's kind of cool that they created those like throwaway Q inventions in this movie, because it's almost like a Hitchcock MacGuffin type of thing, where like you're expecting to see those used. Like they never show up, which is neat. I think it's cool.
Yeah. And again, it kind of subverts the expectation of Bond's going to use this to get out of everything.
Right.
Yeah. Again, it's a very different Bond movie, and that's why I like it a lot. The whole ending scene at like their factory where they're creating all these drugs, or like siphoning it into the gasoline of the trucks, is really cool. And Benicio del Toro is an awesome villain in this movie, and he's the youngest villain ever in a Bond movie at 21 years old. He's super young in this movie. I like how he dies. It's a very brutal way of getting killed. He gets through the conveyor belt scene is very kind of Indiana Jones-esque from like Temple of Doom, and then Benicio del Toro's character gets grinded into that, where they're grinding up the cocaine into the gasoline. Yeah, that's crazy and super bloody. That's brutal. Again, there's a lot of brutal, violent moments in this movie, and you're just like, oh, like you're taken aback by it because it's so different.
I mean, his character is pretty brutal. And like he's kind of the like he's not the muscle, he's like the assassin. In on the bad guy team, which I think is awesome. And he can play a scumbag like really well.
He's a great actor.
So like, it was cool to see him in this. I know we kind of talked about that he was in the movie last week when we were talking a little bit about it. I mean, I think he adds an awesome dimension to the movie. Like his character, and like we said, he's the only person in the entire organization that's seen Bond's face. So that payoff at the end is pretty cool. And like, creates it creates like the peril for Bond, at the end. Right.
And then you get this awesome truck chase scene through like these mountain roads, which is awesome. It's my favorite part of the entire movie, and because it's over the top a little bit, and it's badass. Like Bond pops a fucking wheelie in a semi, which is literally impossible, but super cool, and goes through the flames, and and then just the fight scene kind of on the back of the tanker truck with Sanchez with the machete trying to kill him and everything, and then Sanchez kills that one dude who's like the money guy. that part, I always am like, oh fuck, like he just like brutally murders the dude,
Yeah.
like, and the noise the guy makes where he's like, ah! Like it's like it's sad. Every time I see that scene, I'm like, oh dude, that guy was cool. Like he
all
gets-
that guy
he
cares
gets
about
wrecked.
is making money for the organization, and Sanchez is just like, I'm done with you.
Yeah,
Just blows him away.
yeah, and it's kind of crazy because like it's funny. There's almost a contrast of like Bond's very calculated revenge plot, and then at the end, Sanchez is like, all right, I'm going to get revenge on this guy that I trusted because loyalty's so huge to me, and
Yeah.
that this guy, betrayed my trust. And his is all about like, I don't give a shit. I want to kill this guy, and it costs him like everything, obviously, including his life.
Right. Well, and like, there's multiple times in the movie where he says like, money means nothing to me, like trust
Yeah.
is everything, and
Yep.
like he shows that in the end where like through the entire final sequence, like that his like accountant or whatever is like, this whole facility cost us like $32 million,
Yeah.
and like, and Sanchez is like, I don't care, like
Yeah.
there's like $500 million of cocaine in these gas tankers, and like he's just blowing them up like it's nothing because all he cares about is killing Bond
Yeah.
at the end. And like, that's like the accountant's just like freaking out the whole time. He's like watching like the organization crumble in front of him, but it means
Yeah.
nothing to Sanchez because he's like,
Yep.
I gotta kill this fucking guy.
Yeah, and I think that lends to the really good arc of the villain. It makes him complex, like you were talking about earlier. It really helps make him a formidable opponent to Bond, like a true opponent to Bond, and it just makes him an interesting character that you're like, okay, like I like watching this guy on screen even though he's the bad guy.
Right. And like that's, like Sanchez does care about money, and like it's obvious, through the movie, but that added dimension of loyalty above everything else makes him more, like you said, formidable. Because like if you just burn like his operation to the ground or whatever, like he would be upset, and like that maybe that debilitates him, or whatever. But like the fact that like he's willing to just piss all of that away makes him like much more dangerous
Yeah.
to Bond, and it makes it a very the stakes are much higher in that end sequence than just like a Bond blew up the factory like a boo-hoo. Like he's willing to just throw everything away to get that satisfaction of killing the guy that betrayed him. I think that's an awesome element, and like one of the things that I think they do better in the Bond movies following this are making more complex villains that don't just have a singular drive,
Yeah.
that are like, which is why I think this movie reminds me a bit of GoldenEye, is because Alec's character is basically trying to get revenge on MI6 for like screwing him over in the beginning of the movie. And like, the classic for England, James, and he says no for me and shoots him, and he falls off the giant satellite dish or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
like that's a very like iconic moment in the Bond franchise, and like I feel like that's this movie I think probably gave a lot to GoldenEye, and like the Daniel Craig movies I think take a lot of inspiration from this movie as well, which you can see like from the violence in the Daniel Craig movies I think is turned up quite a bit compared to this. Like the opening scene in Casino Royale is absolutely brutal. The black and white fight scene in the bathroom, and I think a lot of that's like I think this movie definitely, like we've said, is like a nice nod to everything that came before it, but it opened the gates, I think, for
Agreed.
everything that came after, in
Yeah.
like a very innovative way.
Yeah, agreed 100%. Yeah, so what I wanted to talk about is it's just how, I mean, this being Timothy Dalton's last Bond movie, it was, and I'm going to read this, and it's going to look like I'm reading it. It's widely incorrectly rumored that this was Timothy Dalton's last Bond film due to it being financially disappointing. It made $175 million on like a $32 million budget. That's a lot of money that it made. They were expecting it to be more like $210 million. They wanted it to be the highest grossing Bond movie ever. Like they had such high expectations for it, especially because it was, an action blockbuster.
How does the $32 million budget compare to other Bond movies? Because I feel like this movie had to have a huge budget.
Yeah, I feel like this is high. I'd have to look into that. But also, this movie came out around the same time as, in 1989, a lot of movies came out. Batman, Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2. We did Tango and Cash. That came out. Like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Star Trek, The Final Frontier. Like all these movies came out roughly similar, and they're just like, all right, well, this movie needs to compete with all those.
Well,
and
all those are all like box office titans. So
yes,
yeah.
So so they a lot of people thought that it was going to be his last movie because of that reason of it being financially disappointing, and I put that in air quotes. But in reality, he was going to star in a third Bond movie called Property of a Lady, which still is yet to be made. There's only a few other titles from Bond movie novels that
like
still
the
have yet to be
original
made.
Ian Fleming series,
yes,
right?
Thank you. That's us. So it was already written and set to start shooting in 1990. Pre-production had already began. However, legal issues with MGM began that year, creating long delays, which eventually led to Dalton announcing his retirement from the role in 1994, a year after his contract expired. So that's why he didn't come back, and he's like, I'm too old to play Bond now. And that's when Pierce Brosnan came out the next year with GoldenEye.
Okay.
But that Property of a Lady was all about nanotechnology apparently. So that movie, the one that they were going to make with Dalton, so it was going to be another kind of groundbreaking, ahead of its time type movie, which is crazy. Another thing. There's a documentary that's made called Inside License to Kill, and it goes over a lot of production mishaps, especially at the tail end of the movie, chronologically wise. The whole tanker scene, the whole truck scene, that was crazy. Because it was filmed on the dangerous La Rumorosa Road, which had been closed down at the time of filming because of fatal accidents, because it's such a snake-like mountain road. One of the mishaps involved the dummy rocket that Sanchez used to bring down Pam's plane. The rocket traveled 2.5 miles, striking and injuring a telephone worker.
Jeez.
Just imagine that. You're just working on your telephone line, and all of a sudden a fucking rocket hits you.
Jesus.
What the fuck? So that's hilarious.
The number of there's a lot of wild stunts in this movie.
Yeah.
But the ending is just 100% stunt work, and it's all huge, wild stunts.
Bond drives on the side to avoid the rocket, which is super cool, on the the side wheels of the truck, which is awesome, but also physically impossible. Yeah, but super cool. Then there's more that happened. Upon investigation, it was determined that this stretch of road was where a van with 5 nuns crashed and were killed. The bizarre accidents and incidences had continued. Timothy Dalton was nearly added to the list of tragedies when Bond releases the tanker truck to blow up the tanker trucks at the bottom of the hill, and he jumps into the semi. All the vehicles were cleared from the area, but when Dalton comes around the curve, a vehicle was in his path, and he narrowly missed the vehicle driving over the edge,
Jeez.
or he nearly missed driving over the edge. He would have driven over the edge if he didn't avoid it, and he would have died, of course, because it was just a huge drop. And so, yeah, just others like John Glenn, the director, and others stated that human figures would be seen standing around the fleet of the Kenworth of semis before filming, which is fucking creepy. So, like, they definitely saw ghosts. Could have been the nuns. Who knows? When challenged by security guards, and, like, you know, set people were like, "Oh, that's bullshit." They would simply disappear. The, like, people. Like, fucking wild. Two semis caught fire for no apparent reason. One started up and drove by itself a short distance before coming to a stop. Fucking terrifying. The biggest creepy surprise occurred when filming that final tanker explosion, which is a crazy huge explosion at the end, which is really cool and a very, staple to Bond, a massive explosion. The scene went off without a hitch. The still photographer was taking pictures of it, and upon reviewing the photos, and you can Google this, and it's kind of goofy, but who knows if this is real, but people say it is. Upon looking at the pictures, there's a giant flame hand in the flames. It's a giant hand. It's like, I mean, it's made out of the flames, but it's so weird, and apparently, like, John Glenn was like, "Oh, that's fucking bizarre and wild." He's like, "All right, I want a giant picture of that." And are you looking it up?
Yeah.
Yeah, look it up. His wife was like, "No, I don't want that picture in my house. Fuck that." So, just pretty wild to read that trivia. You see that? Like, it's a giant hand, and it's really creepy. And to our
like
viewers listening,
out
Google
of
it.
the fireball.
Yeah, it's creepy.
That is creepy.
Can't, that's a still photography that the photographer on set took. You can't see it in the movie because I was reading about it and I was looking at the movie, that scene in particular, and I didn't find it. And, like, if you look on, like, Reddit and stuff, you can see people trying to find it. But it was taken, from a different perspective and not within the context of the film.
It's weird too because it's in the direction opposite of where the rest of the explosion is traveling, that's kind of weird and creepy.
Yeah, just like, that's super terrifying and creepy. Like, I don't know, it's just interesting. And reading that, I was like, holy shit. So, yeah.
Here, I'll pull it up real quick. Just if you're watching on YouTube, you can see there's like a hand coming out of the main
bottom
fireball.
left of the fireball, you can see the hand. Can you zoom in on that a little bit, or is it?
Let me see.
And for those who are not, watching and just listening, you can Google it. Just Google "License to Kill" flaming hand. Yeah, pretty wild.
You see it a little bit better
there we go. Yeah, like, how weird and creepy is that?
Yeah. It's weird. It's very weird.
Yeah, pretty bizarre.
Especially with all the other things that are, reportedly going on at that specific location. Like, yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. So, pretty interesting. But yeah, that's trivia wise, that's pretty much all, and like fun, cool behind the scenes stuff. That's pretty much all I got. But definitely an interesting movie to dissect. And I'm glad we did it. And it's our first Bond movie. I'm sure we'll do another one from the 80s in the future, especially like A View to a Kill, which I love. But yeah, this movie, I was shocked you hadn't seen it, especially with you and me knowing you're a big Bond fan. Yeah.
I mean, growing up, I had really, like I said in the beginning, primarily watched Connery and Moore. And obviously the Daniel Craig movies, because those were contemporary to us, like, growing up.
We saw Casino Royale together.
Yeah, like, came out like right at like the perfect time, like, for us to like get into those,
was that
maybe middle school when Casino Royale came out?
It was like 2006.
So that would have been like 5th or 6th grade for us, I feel like.
Yeah, I think
something like that. So yeah, I mean, we were like right around 13 when that came out, I think. So yeah, like so that's what always hooked me.
Yeah, 2006.
And like, I always liked, like Goldfinger is great.
Yeah.
Like Live and Let Die is probably my favorite classic Bond movie. Just because I love the Paul McCartney and Wings wrote the theme song for that.
Classic.
It's great. The plot is also very cool because it's like a like drug operation, type of thing, and it takes place in the U.S. for the most part, which is super cool. But yeah, I mean. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This movie just really like pleasantly surprised me.
Good.
It's great. I'm glad we watched it.
Yeah.
And I'm actually glad because I was building the list of movies, and I knew that there were a few different options from the 80s, and I in my head actually mixed this up with A View to a Kill.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we watched this instead of A View to a Kill. Because I like A View to a Kill is a fun movie. It's cool, but it's very typical Bond, like goofy, campy, of like the Roger Moore era. Yeah, this is like
this fits the 80s vibe for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Overall, yeah, good. This is a great movie. If you didn't watch it, absolutely go watch it.
Yeah. Very
highly
80s,
recommend
fits our vibe of kind of why we started this podcast of crazy 80s movies, and it's cool to see that in a very mainstream franchise of James Bond. I mean, I grew up on Bond, and this movie is definitely up there in my top Bond movies just because of how awesome it is and different.
Yeah.
So, definitely check it out if you haven't.
It's always fun when we find these like hidden gems that
it's underrated.
Neither of us have seen, or one of us hasn't seen, and or like underrated, and it's always fun when we get to see one of those movies. So yeah,
and that's why I liked doing Midnight Run, because I think that movie is severely underrated from a comedy and action aspect, especially from De Niro. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go check that out. That's a fun movie to do and watch. This one's super underrated and definitely deserves more praise than it has already, especially from its kind of cult status. I'm really happy we did this one, and I definitely think everyone should watch it because it's fun.
Speaking of underrated movies, the next one is not. I think everybody knows our next movie, which is Police Academy, which surprisingly I have never seen. So another one that'll be fun to talk about. And get our two perspectives, because I know you've seen this movie.
But it's been, the thing is, I haven't seen it in years. Like, I mean, I saw it when I was like under 10 years old. So I don't remember a damn thing except for the one.
Maybe it'll be pretty much new for both of us.
It's pretty much going to be new. All I know is Steve Guttenberg, who I love, and it's the I don't know his name, and I apologize, but like the one, there's a black guy in it that does all the sound effects, all these crazy sound effects, and it's awesome. He is so good in it and so funny, and I'm excited to see that. And there's like 7 of them. Police Academies. Yeah. So I don't know which one I've seen. So this will be like a fresh take on watching it. So
cool.
Hope
It'll
you guys
be fun.
Yeah, hope you guys stick around for that one, and let us know what you think of License to Kill.
Yeah.
All right.
If you guys have suggestions of things we should watch, shoot them over to us. DM us on Instagram at Movie Matters Podcast, I think is the handle.
I think so too.
Leave comments on the YouTube videos too. That always works as well. So see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys. Take care.